Imagine standing in the heart of what used to be a vibrant Australian woodland, but instead of the symphony of birds and the rustle of green leaves, you are surrounded by a graveyard of gray, brittle branches and silent earth. This was the reality for a massive stretch of territory in New South Wales that had been ravaged by years of drought and ecological collapse. The experts called it a lost cause, a zone where the cycle of life had simply stopped. But then a team of daring ecologists decided to play a high-stakes game with nature. They didn't bring in heavy machinery or expensive fertilizers. Instead, they arrived with dozens of wooden crates containing 50,000 tiny, iridescent beetles. To the casual observer, it looked like a drop in the ocean, a desperate gesture against an environmental catastrophe. But as the sun set over that silent horizon, those 50,000 beetles began a transformation so radical and so rapid that it has left the global scientific community in a state of absolute shock. What came back from that gray wasteland wasn't just a few plants. It was a biological uprising that has rewritten the rules of forest restoration forever. Today, we are going to dive into the heart of this miracle, exploring how a tiny insect managed to reboot an entire ecosystem, the secret technology they carried in their tiny bodies, and the terrifying beauty of what happens when nature is given the right spark to fight back. To understand why this project was so insane, you first have to understand the condition of the Australian outback in this specific region. It wasn't just that the trees had passed away. The soil itself had become effectively hydrophobic. This means that when it did rain, the water would simply slide off the surface like it was hitting a sheet of glass, never reaching the roots, never soaking in. The nutrient cycle was broken. Without insects to break down the fallen timber and leaf litter, the ground was choked by a layer of dry, flammable debris that prevented any new seeds from touching the earth. It was a vicious cycle of decay. Conventional wisdom said it would take 500 years for this forest to recover on its own. The researchers, however, didn't have 500 years. They had one theory and 50,000 secret weapons. These weren't just any beetles. They were a specific subspecies of dung beetles and jewel beetles, carefully selected for their ability to survive in extreme heat and their obsessive drive to tunnel. When the crates were opened, the scientists weren't just releasing bugs. They were releasing the world's smallest and most efficient construction crew. As soon as they hit the ground, the beetles did what they do best. They began to dig. Thousands of tiny tunnels began to perforate that glass-like soil. It seemed insignificant at first, but then something happened that no one expected. A week after the release, a light rain shower hit the area. Instead of washing away the topsoil, the water found those 50,000 holes. For the first time in a decade, the moisture traveled deep into the earth, reaching the ancient seed banks that had been sleeping in the dark for years. But the tunneling was only the beginning of the show. The true genius of the beetle project lay in what these insects were carrying. Beetles are famous for being nature's janitors, but they are also incredible couriers. As they moved through the gray, dusty landscape, they were inadvertently transporting fungal spores and beneficial bacteria that had been absent from the area for generations. They were literally inoculating the soil with the building blocks of life. Within 3 weeks, the researchers returned to find something that looked like a scene from a fantasy movie. In the middle of the gray timber, tiny neon green shoots began to pierce the surface. These weren't just weeds. They were the pioneer species of the original forest, plants that hadn't been seen in 20 years. The speed of the recovery was what really stunned the scientists. Usually nature moves at a glacial pace, but here it was like someone had hit the fast-forward button. The beetles were breeding at an explosive rate because they had no predators in the area yet, and an endless supply of dry organic matter to process. 50,000 beetles quickly became 5 million. The sound of the forest changed. The silence was replaced by a low, constant hum of activity. As the beetles broke down the fallen wood, they converted it into nitrogen-rich fertilizer, pumping it straight into the root systems of the struggling trees. By the second month, the gray branches weren't just standing there anymore. They were starting to sprout. Canopy cover increased by 15% in a matter of weeks. This success sparked a wave of curiosity across the globe. Why did it work so much better than human intervention? The answer is complexity. When humans try to fix a forest, we tend to do one thing at a time. We plant a tree, or we spread some mulch. But a beetle? A beetle does 10 things at once. It aerates the soil, it transports spores, it processes waste, it provides food for birds, and it creates a microhabitat for other smaller organisms. It is a multitasking masterpiece of evolution. The beetles were rebuilding the internet of the Earth, the complex subterranean network of mycelium and roots that allows a forest to communicate and share resources. Without that network, a forest is just a collection of individual trees. With it, a forest is a living, breathing superorganism. As the green blanket spread across the old wasteland, something even more magical started to happen. The animals came back. First, it was the smaller reptiles, attracted by the abundance of beetles as a food source. Then came the birds, carrying even more seeds from distant, healthy forests in their digestive tracts. Within 6 months, the dead forest was host to a level of biodiversity that was higher than some of the surrounding healthy areas. It was as if the ecosystem had been under a spell and the beetles were the charm that broke it. Scientists were finding species of frogs and orchids that were thought to have vanished from the region entirely. They were coming out of the cracks in the earth, awakened by the sudden presence of moisture and humic acid provided by our tiny armored friends. One of the most profound realizations for the research team was the role of thermal regulation. A huge problem in these arid zones is that the ground gets so hot it cooks any luckless seed that tries to grow. By tunneling and creating a porous surface, the beetles allowed the earth to breathe, reducing the surface temperature by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. This created a cooler microclimate at the ground level, allowing delicate seedlings to survive the midday sun. It was a lesson in humility for the engineers. Nature didn't need a cooling system designed in a lab. It needed the ancient, instinctual architecture of an insect. But the project wasn't without its tensions. In the early stages, there was a fear that the beetles might become an invasive species themselves, disrupting the few remaining pockets of life. Australia has a long, painful history with introduced species like the cane toad. The scientists had to monitor the beetle population with surgical precision, but because these beetles were native to the broader continent, and were simply being reintroduced to a region they had once inhabited, the balance was perfect. They didn't take over, they integrated. They became the gears in a clock that had been jammed for a long time. By the end of the first year, the transformation was so complete that the original photos of the gray wasteland looked like they were from a different planet. The forest was now a dense, tangled paradise of shrubs, wildflowers, and young eucalyptus trees. The water cycle had been completely restored. During the next heavy rain, the forest acted like a giant sponge, soaking up every drop and preventing the flash flooding that had plagued the nearby towns for years. The beetles had not only saved the trees, they had protected the human communities as well. This project, known officially as the Invertebrate-Led Restoration Initiative, has now become a blueprint for conservation efforts in Africa, South America, and the American West. It has shifted the focus from top-down conservation to bottom-up ecology. Instead of starting with the big charismatic animals like koalas or kangaroos, you start with the soil, the fungi, and the insects. If you get the small stuff right, the big stuff takes care of itself. It's a powerful metaphor for life. The smallest actions, when multiplied by 50,000, can change the world. Let's talk about the specific beetle that was the MVP of this operation, the Onthophagus taurus, or the bull-headed dung beetle. This tiny creature can pull over 1,000 times its own body weight. In the context of the forest, that meant they were moving incredible amounts of earth every single day. They were burying nutrient-rich organic matter deep underground where it could be stored safely away from the drying sun. They were essentially carbon sequestration machines. By burying wood and waste, they were locking carbon into the soil, helping to fight the very climate change that had caused the drought in the first place. The scientists who led the project often speak about the moment of awe when they realized it was actually working. It was about 4 months in, during a routine survey. One of the researchers sat down on a log and realized the log was covered in moss. In an area that had been a dust bowl just a short time ago, carpet-like moss was thriving. Moss requires a very specific, humid, and stable environment. Its presence was the ultimate green light from nature. It meant the forest was no longer just recovering. It was healed. What's even more stunning is how the project influenced the local weather patterns. It sounds like science fiction, but massive, healthy forests actually create their own rain through a process called transpiration. By bringing back the trees and the ground cover, the beetle-led forest began to release moisture back into the atmosphere, creating localized clouds. The region started seeing more frequent, gentle rains rather than the rare, destructive storms they had become used to. The beetles hadn't just fixed the ground, they had fixed the sky. The financial aspect of this project is also a game changer. Typical forest restoration costs thousands of dollars per acre when you factor in nurseries, labor, and irrigation. The Beetle project cost a fraction of that. Once you release the beetles, they don't ask for a salary, they don't need fuel, and they don't go on strike. They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, driven by millions of years of instinct. For developing nations or regions with limited budgets, insect-aided engineering is the most viable path forward to combat desertification. As we look at the footage of these beetles at work, it's hard not to feel a sense of deep respect. We often overlook the creepy crawlies of the world. We step on them, we spray them with poison, and we view them as pests. But the Australian experiment has shown that they are the architects of our survival. Without these tiny engineers, our world would quickly become a silent, gray place. They are the glue that holds the ecosystem together. The 50,000 beetles released in Australia weren't just bugs, they were a message of hope. The researchers are now looking into beetle tech, a field of study where we design machines and urban systems based on the tunneling and waste processing patterns of these insects. Can we design better irrigation systems by mimicking beetle tunnels? Can we manage our own waste more effectively by studying how they break down complex organic matter? The forest in Australia has become a massive, open-air laboratory where the teachers are only a few centimeters long. There is a warning in this success story as well. The beetles were able to fix the forest, but they can't stop the root cause of the problem. If global temperatures continue to rise and if water management at a national level isn't fixed, even an army of 1 billion beetles won't be enough. They are a powerful tool, but they are not a magic wand. We have to do our part to ensure that the environment they rebuild stays hospitable for them and for us. The beetles have given us a second chance. It's up to us not to waste it. The community involvement in this project was also a key part of its success. Local farmers, who were initially skeptical about releasing more bugs near their crops, were eventually the biggest supporters. They saw the quality of their own soil improve as the beetles migrated across the fence lines. They saw their livestock becoming healthier because the grass was more nutritious. It turned into a beautiful partnership between science, agriculture, and nature. It broke down the walls between the greenies and the farmers, showing that everyone wins when the land is healthy. Today, if you visit that region of Australia, you would never know that it was once a dead zone. The trees are tall, the air is cool and fragrant, and the ground is teeming with life. Somewhere beneath your feet, the descendants of those original 50,000 beetles are still at work, ensuring that the forest stays strong and vibrant. They are the silent guardians of the woodland, the tiny heroes of a grand story. This discovery has changed the way we look at empty landscapes. A desert or a dry woodland is never truly empty. It's usually just waiting for the right catalyst. The Australian Beetle Project has taught us that we don't always need to impose our will on nature. Sometimes, we just need to find the right partner within nature and give them the space to do what they've been doing for eons. It's a lesson in biology, a lesson in economy, and most importantly, a lesson in faith in the natural world. The beetles with the iridescent wings and the powerful legs have shown us that the path to a greener future might be right under our feet, scuttling through the leaf litter. We just have to be smart enough to see it. As more countries adopt this beetle power approach, we are seeing a global network of restored lands. From the dry plains of Spain to the scorched hills of California, the beetles are being called into action. And every time, the results are the same. Nature surprises us with its capacity for renewal. In a world that often feels like it's falling apart, the story of the 50,000 beetles is a beacon of light. It reminds us that recovery is possible, that decay is not the end, and that even the smallest creature can be the savior of an entire landscape. It encourages us to look closer at the world around us, to appreciate the tiny miracles happening in every square inch of soil. The beetles have done their job. They have brought the forest back to life. Now it's our turn to protect that life. As we watch the return of the forest, we see a vision of what the future could look like. A world where we work with nature instead of against it. A world where technology and biology are in harmony. The beetles are still digging, still tunneling, and still building. And as long as they are, there is hope for the wild places of our planet. The forest is breathing again, and that is a victory for every living thing on Earth. Thank you for exploring this incredible nature project with us. The story of the Australian beetles is a reminder that we are part of a vast, interconnected web of life where every strand matters. no matter how small. It teaches us that when we respect and empower the smallest members of our planet's community, the rewards are greater than anything we could achieve alone. The forest is back. The birds are singing. And somewhere in the moist, dark earth, a beetle is starting a new tunnel, moving a new grain of soil, and continuing the timeless work of keeping our world alive. Stay curious, stay hopeful, and always keep an eye out for the tiny heroes in your own backyard. The world is full of wonder, and sometimes it just takes 50,000 beetles to show us the way. Rebuilding the world doesn't always take a miracle. Sometimes it just takes a beetle, and with that, we leave the revitalized forests of Australia, carrying the lessons of the iridescent engineers with us into the future. It's a journey of 1,000 miles that started with one tiny crawl, and the destination is more beautiful than we ever imagined.